Welcome to the Houndsman XP podcast. We are closing in on fall temperatures, and I'm really looking forward to that. Steve, are you seeing anything of fall yet in Florida?
The only thing I'm seeing fall is me occasionally down here when I don't lift my foot up high enough to step up on the curb. It is hot down here, man. I know that you're probably looking toward the end of August. I always thought around Labor Day, you could just kind of feel that little bit of hint of fall in the air up there in the Midwest. But we won't be looking at that down here probably until October. But we dodged a little tropical depression or whatever this past week, and I think it's kind of petered out. And although we're in the hurricane season down here, we haven't had any. So yeah, we'll hope that continues.
Well, the two major coonhound events are right around the corner, and people will be converging on central Indiana here very shortly for both Autumn Oaks and the PKC Labor Day Classic. It's amazing how many houndsmen end up in Indiana during the month of September.
Oh, yeah, it's the time that we all look forward to. And, September, Labor Day is the first September. They called that event Autumn Oaks, and I guess that's Russian autumn a little bit, but they were anticipating it. And I know on those drives back to Michigan from either North Vernon back in the day or from Richmond, when we get back up around the Michigan line, we could definitely feel that little bit of fall in the air, and that's the time we look forward to.
Well, they call that Autumn Oaks because they're into the power of positive thinking, I guess. Is that how you named that, Steve? Is that how that event got named, Steve?
Well, I don't know how it got named, really. That was back in the days of Ed Furman at UKC, and I think they kicked it off at maybe at Greencastle, and they were in Paducah, Kentucky, and then up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and then went back to Greencastle and stayed there for 20 years. But I don't know who came up with that name. I'm going to guess it was somebody like old Lester Nance, probably. Might have been the one, because he was kind of an innovator back in the day. But
yeah, no doubt. Well,
sure.
While we're talking about Autumn Oaks, let's just do a recap on that real quick, because that is coming up. I've already talked to some houndsmen from the West, and they're going to make their first trips to Autumn Oaks this year to take in the festivities. And so we're going to have our own booth set up there. We're going to be doing some live podcasts out of the booth. We'll have some of our merchandise on hand, and especially Jason Doobie from W Hunting Supply is going to be on hand with us as well. So look for our banner and make sure you come and stop by and talk to us for a few minutes, and don't be shy if we grab you and ask you to do a podcast with us.
That's for sure, Chris, and we're going to be in the vendor barn, the main vendor barn. I'll be doing double duty at Autumn Oaks. I'll be in the American Cooner Full Cry booth. There will be just across the hall from where we normally are there in the booth, in the vendor barn. And right adjacent to us will be, as you said, the Houndsman XP and W Hunting Supply booths. So we're really looking forward to it. As always, it's a reunion. It's a time of year when people get together, and everybody's in anticipation of the coming fall seasons and all. And then I'm sure as we get into introducing our guest today, he'll want to talk about the Labor Day Classic, which all the PKC boys love to hunt at the Classic, and then come back up and visit and buy supplies and so forth at Autumn Oaks. So it's just a great weekend. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and you need to make sure that if you are browsing around on the grounds, you stop by. It's hard telling who you can run into. I know Calvin Redhouse is still trying to work out the logistics on being there. So if you follow Res Hounds on social media, there's a good chance you'll run into him. And then I know that Larry and Jamie Anderson from Dillon, Montana are flying out, and they'll be in for the weekend. And who knows who else you can run into hanging around the Houndsman XP booth or the Cooner booth.
Well, that's for sure. That's one thing that I never tire of is standing around that booth and talking to the people that come by. And it's just, as I said, it's a reunion of coon hunters from all over the country. If you haven't been there, you definitely need to get on over there to Richmond, Indiana, and down to Greensburg. We're going to talk about the guests we have for today. Chris.
Are we going to get into that? Is that why we're here today?
Do you think you and I should just continue to talk throughout this podcast? And I know this guy's busy. He's probably got something to do.
No doubt. And this is going to be I'm very happy to have our guest on today. I've known this guy for a long time, worked with him on several projects. We formed the Hoosier Tree Dog Alliance together and worked hard on that project for a number of years together. And he's a guy that is always working hard. It doesn't matter whether he's volunteering his time or he's getting paid. Usually he's not getting paid enough for what he's doing. But it's my pleasure to introduce Jerry Moll of Salt Creek Coonhounds. And Jerry, what is your title at PKC? You're not the owner, but you're way up there.
Hi, Chris and Steve. How are you guys today?
Doing great, Jerry.
Great to have you on.
My current position is Director of Field Operations at Professional Kennel Club, and I've been there for coming on 9 years now.
Wow, that's amazing.
Time flies.
It's amazing.
Well,
Yes,
Jerry and Steve have a long history together too. You want to talk about that a little bit, Steve?
Well, yeah, for sure. When I went to the PKC, I knew Jerry. I'm sure we met during my UKC days, Jerry. But I know when I went to PKC, I knew that you were quite active in the PKC Walker Association, and always involved. And of course, I knew about your breeding of your Treeing Walkers and all that. And then and we're going to get into some of these things. But when I answered the call of American Kennel Club to go to Raleigh, North Carolina, and work with that company, I was a little surprised and very, very glad that I was able to coach this guy to come along with me and be a right arm, so to speak, in that effort to write a new set of rules and try to get a coonhound program going with the AKC. So Jerry and I go back a long way. I know you and Chris have fought those legislative wars in Indiana, Jerry, and of course you and I fought the corporate wars and all the other things that come along with being at a major coonhound registry. I will tell you this is kind of funny. I know the first time I heard of Chris Powell was probably from you, Jerry. And I remember thinking, your hunting buddy is a game warden. Man, that must be a cross to bear right there. I don't know how you handle that. But anyway, our listeners should know that Jerry and I go back a long way too. And I'm sure not as long as you and Jerry do, Chris, but it's been a great friendship and that I value very highly, and I'm just very pleased that he's on the program today.
Yeah, so this probably is going to take a lot of rabbit paths because all three of us know each other so well, and even though we have a show outline, it's probably going to take some rabbit paths. And the first one I'll take is Jerry. Do you remember this? Remember how we met?
Yeah, I believe I talked to you a few times, just casually, when we happened to be at the Cross Plains Coon Club down by Versailles at a couple different events, but nothing too extensive. But then during the years that I operated Salt Creek Supply, a little hunting store business, during that period, I'd had an issue with a neighbor of some land I was hunting on that somehow took on the idea that he was a landowner, and he wasn't, and he happened to be a state police officer, and anyway, that became quite an ordeal, and I contacted you for advice, and we started talking, and actually I think that may have been the very light beginnings of the Hoosier Tree Dog Alliance, because all those discussions kind of evolved into, we really need some representation in this state for coon hunters and dog lovers.
Well, let's back up a little bit. I think we met before that in a cornfield that had some silage spread on it.
Oh, okay. Yes. That's a pretty good story that I missed after your first question, but yeah, let me kind of lay that one out. It was about 3 weeks before the PKC World Championship in Aurora, Kentucky, and I'm going to guess it was about in 1998 or somewhere close around there.
Right.
And I was getting my dog Molly Ann ready for the PKC World Hunt, and my neighbor, who's a dairy farmer here, had just chopped off a cornfield for silage. So it was like walking on carpet. I mean, you were walking out there on dry dirt. You weren't making a sound. And it was one of those nights it was lightly moonlit. And Molly Ann was way in some thickets in there. And she was kind of what you might call a semi-silent dog. And I was standing out in the cornfield just minding my own business, and I was running the 6 on her every time she would hush.
Yeah.
And just curious about what she was going to do with this track. And just out of the blue, I was in my own little world there, and a light flashed in my eyes, and somebody said, "Halt, conservation officer," or something similar. And
he's always been on a power trip, Jerry. Go ahead.
My heart just about jumped out of my chest, because I thought I was the only one in the world out there, a few hundred yards from the truck. And I can remember one of the first questions he asked me as I turned sideways a little bit to talk to him, and I could see out of the corner of my eye there was a light flashing around my truck. And he said, "Do you have any firearms with you?" And I just held my hands up and said, "You can see I don't have any." He said, "Yeah, but do you have any in the truck?" I said, "Well, why don't you ask your buddy out there looking through it?"
I stood there and watched. I stood there and watched you for probably. You were involved in running that stopwatch on Molly Ann, because I stood there and watched you from probably 10 feet away, right out in the middle of the open cornfield for probably, I don't know. It seemed like 10 minutes. It was probably more like a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and didn't see any firearms around you or anything. But yeah, that was an epic encounter right there. That's probably the best stalk I ever put on a human being in my life. But it wasn't that difficult with you being distracted in the conditions. That's for sure.
That was definitely the first time I met you. So
yep.
That is a good memory.
Yeah, and then from there we just kind of, I think I stood out there with you and listened to Molly Ann work that track for a while, and that's kind of where it all started.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Chris, let's ask Jerry a little bit about who he is. For those of you, I know we have a lot of listeners around the country that may not be tuned in to the coonhound sport the way we are. And I'd like for Jerry just to give us a little information about who he is and his family. I think there's a remarkable story there, Jerry, about you and your wife, Brenda, and your families. Can you get into that a little bit?
Sure. I was born in southeastern Indiana, around a little town called Batesville, and I'm the youngest of 13 children. I had 5 brothers and 7 sisters, and grew up on a little 80-acre farm. None of my family ever hunted or was interested in hunting. I did get a couple of my brothers to go squirrel hunting with me a couple of times, maybe rabbit hunting and coon hunting once or twice, but that's it. My dad, as you can imagine, having 13 kids, was pretty focused on work. He was probably the hardest working person that I've ever met. When I was growing up, he had 3 jobs. He drove a pop delivery truck around to the local stores at that time. You know, there were just small stores scattered all over, and he drove a delivery truck in the morning, and then in the afternoon he would take care of his farming things, and then at midnight he would go to a truck stop, and he worked there till 7 in the morning, and then he would start all over again. And so he convinced me pretty early in life that there was no time for hunting.
Well, his time management must have been really good, because you've got 12 brothers and sisters.
Yep.
He found time for to build a family.
He was definitely good at that. Yeah. But I was probably I was at a young age when we first got indoor plumbing, and I can still remember taking baths in the summertime in galvanized tubs outside. And of course we had the old outhouse, and so we grew up a little bit poor, and gradually improved things as we went along. I was probably 4 years old when my first brother was drafted for Vietnam, and then my second oldest brother the next year, and then my third oldest brother the following year. That's a little about me. And then as Steve was asking about Brenda,
this is the amazing part too.
when I was 16, going on 17, I worked a summer job at the local Dairy Queen as a cook, and Brenda's sister Mary also worked there, and she was a couple years older than me, but roughly the same age. And during that summer, Mary had her little sister Brenda come there and bust tables on Sunday mornings, because we had a big breakfast thing on Sundays. And so that's where I met Brenda. She was 11 years old at the time, and so we were far enough apart in age we really didn't pay any attention to each other much, but that's where I met her. But coincidentally, Brenda is also the youngest of 13, and just the opposite of me. They had 7 boys and 6 girls. But we started dating when I was 25, and we got married when I was 30. And Brenda's 5 years younger than me. And to answer the question most people ask when I tell them that we're both the youngest of 13, no, we had no plans to have 13 kids. We stopped at 3.
Well, that's great. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
No, I just I've I know you have too, Chris. I've had the privilege of meeting Brenda and Nick and Aaron and Bethany and just the great kids. What are the kids doing now?
That was going to be my question.
Well, it just so happens today Nick is taking the first day of his bar exam. He's got the second full day tomorrow. So he's in Indianapolis today. He graduated with a law degree from IUPUI, and so he's trying to get through his bar so he can get a real lawyer job. So our thoughts and prayers are with Nick today, so he gets through that. And Aaron graduated from Franklin College a couple years ago with a degree in school counseling, and she's actually working a job in Chris's old stomping ground in Columbus and Bartholomew County with the social services there. She's counseling kids and during the day, and she's going to school at night at Butler University in Indianapolis to get her master's. So she's working on that. And our youngest, Bethany, she graduated last month from Franklin College with a degree in art history and photography.
Yeah.
Amazing. It's amazing.
Coincidentally, yesterday was the 10th anniversary of us finding out that Bethany had a brain tumor. So we're very thankful for how all that went, and very blessed that she's doing as well as she is.
Yeah,
sure.
That's a great success story by itself, Bethany's story. But that was probably the first time, not the first time, but one of the most memorable times that I saw Houndsman come together to support your family there, Jerry. And I still remember being out there at the old Carthage Coon Hunters Club for that benefit dinner, and I think we had an auction and different stuff for her, and it's amazing the heart and the spirit of our houndsmen when there's a fellow houndsman in need.
It was overwhelming, and it's still something that I reflect on quite often.
Yeah.
Well, Jerry, you're a Boilermaker, right?
Yes, I
if not by trade, at least by loyalty, right?
Yes, in the 80s, I was going to school and in the evenings, and in a couple of those years, it really put a damper on my coon hunting because I was going to school either 3 or 4 nights a week, and with all the driving and my regular job and studying and whatnot, I did not put a whole lot of time in my dogs, and it showed. But it was one of those things. One of those things I was motivated to get it done, and so I hit it pretty hard there till I was done.
So you did. You have what degrees do you hold at Purdue, Jerry?
I finished my degree in organizational leadership with Purdue.
I see.
And that's come in
handy.
I
was extremely fortunate. Yes, it has, and I was extremely blessed and fortunate to finish my degree with a 4.0, and that was my goal, and it came through for me.
You know, I think of you a lot down here, Jerry. I'm a baseball fan, love the sport. We've got a Hoosier kid down here with the Tampa Bay Rays named Kevin Kiermaier. He's a platinum glove center fielder. Amazing to watch this kid play ball. And he is a diehard Purdue fan. I mean, at every opportunity that he can, he talks about Purdue. And I always think about you when he does. So there you go. Yeah. Well, Jerry, what were some of your earliest memories of hunting and getting involved in the hounds?
Well, my first encounter, I guess you would say, as a young boy, I would often go outside and listen. Once I heard hounds running or treed for the first time, then quite often I would go outside and listen for it. And I guess I must have been around the age of 11 or 12 or so then. And our farmhouse sat kind of up on a plateau, and we had a creek that ran down just a quarter mile to the east of us, and then to the west of us, probably a half or three-quarters of a mile, was another creek, and those creeks both kind of met quite a ways to the north of us. So up on top of the hill where the farmhouse was, I could hear a long way. And
back in those days, you could.
One night, yeah, there wasn't much. Our closest neighbor was a mile away, and probably the second closest neighbor was 2 miles away. So we were kind of secluded. And one time I got the notion. I stepped out on the porch and heard dogs treed down by the creek. So I just went and got dressed and snuck out of the house and went down there. Of course, my mom was pretty upset with me when she found out, because I kind of scared the guys hunting down there about like Chris scared me the night he walked up on me. But I just walked up there, and they thought I was going to try to run them out of there or something. And I quickly explained that I just wanted to see what was going on because I was interested. But and so I hunted with them there a little bit on into that night, and then they dropped me off at the house, and then they would come by and pick me up once in a while after that to go with them. But that's how I got my start and my interest. The only thing we had around the house was a German Shepherd, and I started hunting him at night, and I did get him to where I could tree possums with him, but I never did tree a coon with him, but I was pretty excited to do that.
That's awesome.
Well, did you have any early mentors or people that influenced you to get more involved in hunting? I mean, we all seem to have those people in our backgrounds.
Yeah. One of the guys I ran around with from high school, he had a dog, and it was about like what I started out with. It wasn't much. When it was another interesting story. When I bought my first coonhound, it was a blue tick, and I can remember it was from Glenn Markham's stock. I think he was from Missouri, but anyway, my buddy that I hunted with a little bit was telling me that a guy had him for sale over by Sumlin, and I'd saved up my money from trapping and detasseling corn and whatnot, and so I was ready to buy something. So I went over and looked at this dog, and he was a nice looking dog, and so I talked to the guy a little bit and made plans to come back that night to go hunting with him. And so I show up at his house, and of course I was maybe 15 at that time, and another guy was there talking to him about the dog, and after they were done talking there, I said, "Well, you ready to go hunt?" And he said, "If you want the dog, I'll sell him to you, but if you don't want him, this guy's going to buy him right now." So we're not going hunting. So you can imagine what happened then.
Right.
He had me set up with his buddy there, and so I bought the dog and spent $200 on it, and took it home and tied it behind. I was a real smart kid, as you can imagine. I tied it behind the barn so Dad wouldn't know I had it. It didn't take him too long to figure out there was a blue tick ball in back there, but and he was pretty upset with me for wasting my money on a coonhound. Not to mention that I'd be out at night and then him wanting me up at 5 the next morning to help. But he was a big, pretty dog, had a big mouth on him, and he would tree a coon, but I would have to sprint through the woods to get to him because he would locate 2 or 3 times. And if you weren't there by that, end of that third locate, he was gone running again. But I was able to kill a few coons with him after I learned kind of what he was doing. But mostly it was just walking through the woods with him.
Yeah. Ruined you for life.
And then, as time went on over the next several years, I bought a couple of registered red bones, and I even had a black and tan, and none of those really panned out for me. I guess the first good dog I had, I went to try what was supposed to be a broke dog out over by Clinton, Indiana, and the dog looked kind of so-so, but the guy had a crossbred female out of that Walker dog and a red bone, and the pup looked just like a red bone, but it was actually a crossbred. And when we got back to his house, I ended up buying that pup that was running around there, and I guess that was the first dog I really trained, and she turned out to be a really nice dog, one of the best track dogs I ever owned. And unfortunately, she got killed on the road when she was about 3, but that was probably my first good dog, or what I considered to be a good dog back in those days.
Right.
Well, it sounds like things have kind of come full circle with you on that, Jerry, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But I'm thinking, as you're talking about crossbreds, I know you've dabbled in those waters a little here lately. But anyway, I don't want to jump ahead there. But go ahead.
But then I'd gotten another crossbred Walker pup, and he was about as ugly as you could get. In fact, the guy got him from, nicknamed him Super Ugly. His if you can picture this, a Walker dog's head, and half of his face was red with a cauliflower ear, and the other half was solid white with a red ear. And you probably can't get much uglier than that. But anyway, that's the dog that taught me what a track dog was supposed to be like. He started early, and he kind of had me confused the first few times I hunted him with other dogs, because they would run a track, and they may strike a track here close to you, and he would immediately go, if he wasn't with them, he would go to them, and then you'd see him run away from them. And he was the type of dog, when he smelled a track, he would never trail a track. He would pick his head up, and he would go toward the coon. And as he got better, then what was happening was those other dogs would still be trailing, and he'd already be treed, and they would trail right in there to him. But he was an amazingly fast dog. In fact, during deer rutting season, he would catch some deer on the ground, and so that was my first experience with the original style Tritronics.
With the expandable antenna.
Conversations about. Yes.
Remember the 6-foot expandable antenna? That thing was like 4 feet long, and of course, if you weren't careful with it, it'd snap off right at the
you
hand.
Break it. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
I borrowed
and get
one.
To send it back.
Yep, I borrowed one time and didn't broke it off.
Yeah. Those weren't completely reliable, but when they worked, and so I was able to correct him a few times, but that was back when hides were worth a lot of money, and the hunting pressure was really hard around here, and I hunted out of an old 4-door Plymouth, and he would sit in the back seat, and if I seen a coon cross the road, it didn't matter where it was. I just hit the brakes and pull over, and I'd reach back and sling that back door open, and I would get the car parked, and usually by the time I parked the car, he was either treed or he'd have the coon caught on the ground. he was just an artist at that.
Do you know anything
say,
about? Do you know anything about his background, Jerry, as far as the breeding on either side of him?
No, all I knew was he was out of a walker, and the guy didn't know what the other side was.
I got you.
But he looked like he may have had some bird dog in him, because he was chicken breasted, and I mean, if you were going to paint an ugly dog, he was probably it. But he had a really exciting, squally mouth on him, and when he opened on a track, everybody knew what he was doing. You know, he'd get your attention pretty quick. But I guess the first registered walker dog I had when I started getting interested in competition hunting, I'd went to my first competition hunt with a friend of mine down in DuPont, Indiana, and we didn't actually stay for the hunt. I just wanted to go down and see what the excitement was all about. And they had a treeing contest when we pulled in and was going on. I bet they probably had 50 dogs in the treeing contest, and they probably had 30 or 35 in the bench show, and probably 50 in the night hunt. And it was just a regular weekend UKC hunt, and that was probably, I don't know, I guess 1979, somewhere around there maybe. But I started getting more and more interested in that, and I seen an ad in the American Cooner that John Monroe had a dog out of Finley River Joe that was the night champion he had for sale, and I think that was about 1982. And I'd met John at Walker Days at Rushville, Indiana, in 1980, so I kind of knew who he was. And I called him, talked to him about the dog, and me and a friend of mine drove out there in January, I think in 82, and he was, it was, by the time we went hunting, it was somewhere below 20 degrees, and I think it was about 8 degrees when we got done, and I think he treated 3 or 4 coons. So he was one of those old Finley River type cold-nosed dogs, and I really never did like that style of dog, but he was extremely good at what he did, so I ended up buying him. And that a couple months later, I went to my first night hunt, entered in my first night hunt, I should say, at Liberty, Indiana, hunted in a night champion cast down there. Donna Huber and Carl Sasser judged and guided the cast. And I was about as nervous as you could get. I couldn't hardly write my entry slip. My hand was shaking so bad, and I got out there, and I was making all kind of calls that wasn't really needed or wanted.
The judge told you all you got to do is call your dog, son, and you said, "All right, I can do that." Right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, what were so that was a Finley River bred dog. When did you decide? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he was direct out of Finley River Joe.
I got you. Well, that competition thing is something that you've been successful at, Jerry, no doubt. And, as I think back on your breeding down through the years and seeing the times that you got your name called, as we like to say, but leading up to that, what were some of your early experiences that you can remember that would stand out? Maybe our listeners would find interesting of those early days of competition hunting.
Well, the dog, his name was Bing. I guess he was named after Bing Crosby. But I put him in a few hunts, and I was just kind of getting my feet wet. And I got a lot of compliments on the dog just because of his nose. I can remember one time in particular, I went to Shelbyville, Indiana, to a night hunt, and it was about this time of year, and we were short on rain, and everything was just powder dry. And the cast was guided somewhere over there near Milroy, and I can remember when we cut the dogs loose, there was a cloud of dust. I mean, you couldn't even see the bean field for a little bit. That's how dry it was. And it wasn't long, and Bing struck, and he trailed that track for over an hour. And during that time, all three of those other dogs struck on the track at least twice each and came back. So they were all in minus trouble. And it was about an hour and a half later, he treed and had a whole tree full of kittens. But my guess was always that litter probably moved about noon that day. But
Wow.
he wasn't my style of dog, but that's the kind of thing he would do. And again, back then was when hides were worth a lot of money. And I can recall another instance. I ran into some buddies of mine. I was out coon hunting one night in December, and it was a cold night. And I had went by this woods once and seen their truck parked there. I'd planned on hunting there and just went on. And I went somewhere else and came back by there, and they were just coming back to the truck. And so we're sharing hunting stories and whatnot. And I said, hey, while we're talking, I'm going to cut this dog loose. And they said, we just come out of there. I said, yeah, I know. I just want to see what he'll do. And they had just hunted this place for a couple hours, and I cut Bing in there, and he struck and trailed around there for about 45 minutes and treated and had a coon. And that they were pretty impressed by that. But that's just the style of dog he was. But
on those bad nights like that, those kind of dogs will shine, but most of us are too impatient to hunt that kind of dog, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was my problem with him. I would sit there and think about all the things I could or should be doing while he was trailing. and it was about like deer hunting for me. I'm not a very good deer hunter because I sit in the stand about 10 minutes and I start thinking of all the things I'd rather be doing.
That's some of that. That's some of that George Moll influence on you.
I think that's probably it.
Yeah,
maybe I'm thinking I'm in trouble.
Well, what about do you have another story about Bing or about those early dogs?
Well, the one thing it got me thinking, I'd like everybody, I would pour through that American Cooner every month when I got it, and see all these people raising these puppies and how they were going to be the next world champions and whatnot. And I thought, well, I could raise a few litters out of this dog. He's pretty good. He'll probably throw some good dogs. So I bred a couple of my friends' Walker females, and I bought a Walker female that was out of Tennessee Lead and Dahoney Sally, and she was a decent dog, not outstanding, but she would tree coons, and I bred her, and the end result was some of those dogs did make decent dogs, but a lot of them were between 1.5 years and 2 years old before they ever started to tree. They wanted to do a lot of running and trailing, and they just about had to see something climb to get them started treeing. And then, once they started, some of them made pretty decent dogs, but again, the impatient thing of mine, it just wasn't going to work for me. And another thing that happened that set me way back was that Bing got that coonhound paralysis, and he just about died. I went for about 3 weeks there, spoon feeding him and carrying him outside to go to the bathroom and all that. And he finally came back to the point that, you could hunt him, but he just never was the same dog after that. So I started kind of moving on from that. And I guess from a breeding standpoint, everything kind of changed when I hunted with a young Walker female that Tim Buckler and his name escapes me at the moment, Cecil Dake from down by Blooming Grove, Indiana. had a young Walker female that I hunted with, and I bugged him until I got her bought, and that was my original Annie female. And she was way more my style of dog. She was quick on both ends, and pretty independent for a dog, in the early 80s. But that's kind of where all my breeding began. And it seemed like every dog I bred her to, I got something out of it I liked. Even if all of them didn't turn out, I would always get something I liked, and everything I've got in a kennel nowadays goes back to her. So I've been pretty blessed with that.
Well, so roughly how many years have you been breeding, you would consider, from when you started breeding, Jerry, up to the present? About how many years has that been?
Probably somewhere between 35 and 40 years. If you count the years, I was very unsuccessful.
Well, we all have those years for sure. Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of take us back to some of those early back to the competition hunting, Jerry. When I met you, you were, like Steve said, everybody always knew you were there, and everybody was always worried about drawing you and your hounds. Not worried, but they knew that you were packing something. And can you talk a little bit about some of your significant wins in competition hunting?
Yeah, early on,
this is your chance to brag.
I didn't do.
I know that's out of character.
I don't have a whole lot to brag.
I know that's out of character for you, but we're gonna expose that so that people know who we've got on here, because I've always been impressed with the style of hound you hunt, and go for it.
Well, speaking of exposed, I guess that's a good word to use, because once I started hunting in the night hunts, one thing that was exposed pretty quickly is I wasn't a very good handler. And
you always say that.
I found out pretty quickly that if I was going to win anything ever, I was going to have a dog good enough to do what they were supposed to do, plus make up for my mistakes. And that was kind of hard to come by. But my first, I would say, really good competition dog was a female called Ann 2, and she was a lot like her mother. She was out of Annie and Matney Southern Pride. She was a lot like her mother, but she was just better in each of the departments that her mom was. She was a lot like her, but she was just better.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the type of dog that if there was a working track or running track, she could take one. I mean, she could compete well with both of those, and she would tree a layup when nothing else was going on. So she was probably one of the best balanced dogs I ever had. And back in those days when I had her, there wasn't a whole lot of independent dogs. I mean, once in a while you'd have a dog tree off by itself, but chances are, if you went to a hunt, you were going to have a culling contest from the time you turned loose till you got done. I mean, whoever struck first, whoever treed first.
Mm-hmm.
And she was good at that because she was a one bark tree dog, and I didn't make as many mistakes with her as I would normally. And even when I did make mistakes, she bailed me out quite often. I won the Lee Crawford hunt with her.
Explain what that is, Jerry. Explain to our listeners what the Lee Crawford hunt is.
Okay. Well, my first Walker days that I went to in 1980 at Rushville, Indiana, at that time, Mr. Lee Crawford was the president of the Walker Association. And Lee was one of those guys, and I'm sure you met him, Steve, but he was one of those guys that would stick in your mind as something to aspire to. if you heard his name mentioned anywhere, it was always positive, never negative. And when you talk to him about other people, it was always positive and never negative. He just was a class act kind of guy, and he held that reputation. And after he passed away, the Walker Association created a memorial hunt called the Lee Crawford Invitational, and you had to qualify by placing in a Walker Days or a Walker Sectional or something like that.
Right.
And so one of my first time, it may have been the first time I ever competed in the Lee Crawford hunt. I don't remember that for sure, but it was in 1992, and it was at Richmond, Indiana. And it was and it was the first year that a Walker female ever won the hunt, and I was fortunate and drew out on a good cast, and I think memory serves me, I had scored 1150, and I made one of my handler mistakes and won the cast with 1075, I think. And so I was pretty excited. It was the first really, national type win that I had, and it just so happened that Brenda was with me, and so it made it that much more special.
Which
I remember that picture very well.
Yeah, that was with Ann too, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
That was Ann too.
Yep.
And then the following year, I kind of got on a roll with her, and I got through the UKC zones and got to the finals up at Van Wert, Ohio, and I think that was one of the times I sat down and talked to Steve a little bit. That was the year Duke Prue won the World Hunt, and interesting story about that. As luck would have it, she was looking real good, and I got through the first night easily. The early round against dogs, and then the late round, I think she treated 2 or 3 coons by herself. And when we got ready when I went out and got her out of the dog box to take the next round of pictures on Saturday, she was dripping blood. And so I let her in there for the pictures, and I was following her, sweeping up her blood with my foot, so nobody would see it. And she just, as sometimes happens with females, her coming in heat, she really kind of lost her mind, and she didn't look good at all the next round. So I didn't make it in the final 4, and ended up placing 11th.
11th in the World Hunt. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Pretty good stuff right there.
Now, you said she was out of Matney Southern Pride?
Yes.
Okay. That's a dog that some of our older listeners or longtime listeners will remember. Why did you pick that dog to breed to, Jerry?
Well, early on, I got interested in family breeding early on, and the old Annie female was a double Finley River and double Spring Creek Rock bred dog, and Southern Pride was directly out of Finley River Banjo, and so I wanted to double up on that a little bit, and that's how that happened.
Right.
So what drove
I'd hunted with a.
What drove your interest to family breeding, Jerry? I mean, you hadn't been hunting that long, and back in those days, family breeding probably, maybe my memory just isn't as good, but it doesn't seem like that was really talked about a whole lot back then. So what piqued your interest in that?
Well, my interest in it probably became more through livestock breeding for cattle and hogs, and there was a lot of that going on there, and so I was kind of used to seeing that being done, and used to seeing good results from it. So
yeah.
it was probably based more on that than it was on dogs.
Well, let's progress a little bit and talk about some other. Just kind of give us a laundry list of because you always hunted a female for the most part when I went through the years, and I know that you've been fond of hunting those females, and you've had a lot of good success with those. So, kind of run through a laundry list of the females that have been successful and where they've won.
Okay. Well, I started out with the original Annie female, and I placed her in Walker days 2 different years. One was in out in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and then the next year, I think that was 1980, maybe 86 and 87, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and then the next year at Van Wert, Ohio. And she was just a registered dog, so I think I placed her 7th one year and maybe 9th another year, something like that. Then Ann 2, we went through pretty much what I won with her. She was the first, Ann 2 was the first dog I ever hunted in a PKC hunt in my life. Mm-hmm. I went to my first hunt at DuPont, Indiana, and got in a funnel, and they split, and I was driving home with money, and I thought, this is a pretty good deal. So that kind of hooked me a little bit there. The third female that I was doing real well with and ended up selling her mainly because of the schooling thing was a female called Dixie out of Old Annie and Houses Lipper. I drove out to Missouri and bred to Lipper when Mac McAllister had him, and I'd kept a female, and her name was Dixie, and she was definitely the right kind, and I ended up selling her, and then later on in life I bought her back and bred her to Nailer, mm-hmm. and I got a female of that cross, and that was where Molly Ann came from. And she was one of the better dogs I've ever had. She could do most anything, most any way, and she was probably the first really independent dog I had. As far as not that the other ones would split tree once in a while, but Molly Ann was probably the first one that went out there with the intent to be away from other dogs. She would intentionally go the opposite way. Mm-hmm. And that also helped out my poor handling skills because I didn't have to get in a hurry about anything. She was always good about having a coon, and I never really won anything really big with her. Qualified her for the World Hunt several times and won a decent amount of money in PKC with her, and she was a dual grand champion. And then there was a female out of Ann 2 and Don Gostomski's old Lipper's Mac dog that I called Ann 3, and she was pretty special. It was during the same time I had Molly Ann, and I was struggling trying to keep both of them hunted. And Danny Wilson, which I think both of you guys know,
right, for sure,
down by North Vernon, he was hunting her some for me, and he lost her. He had a theory that she got in one of those caves down in there, because there is some in that area.
Right. Yep, there are.
And never heard from again. But I had bred her to Sackett Jr. and had really good results, and I got a female called Ann 4 that made a dual grand champion and was a nice female. So that took me several years through there just to get through those dogs, and I bred the next really good cross I made was when I bred Molly Ann to Hardwood Henry. When he was a young dog yet. Brad Fleetwood still owned him. That's before the Burgesses bought Henry, and there was 10 pups out of that litter, and that's where the Jenny female I had came from. And she was one of the best I had. As far as a competition dog, she was probably the best I ever had. And her strongest point from day one, and it was just a natural thing, is the first few coons I shot out to her, she didn't even look at them. She was wanting loose to go hunting. And I just about had to lead her over and show her what the coon was. But she was like that from day one and forever. Mm-hmm. And it's something I never really noticed that much in a night hunt. But that even when you recast off a tree, just about every dog loses some downtime there. And even if it's not real noticeable, I mean, even if they go hunting, they don't necessarily do something right away. And that was where she would really shine, because when you cut her off of a scored tree, you know, before the other dogs got done messing around there, she would usually be struck or treed somewhere. And that was her strong point.
And would you tell us what you did with Jenny? Because that's pretty cool too. As far
Jenny,
as
I won.
There you go. Yeah, what you won with her?
I won in 2002. I was third in the PKC World Championship, and then in 2003 I was third in the UKC World Championship, and she got me in several semifinals of pro hunts and so on and so forth. And I, you know, she was a dog that I really enjoyed taking to a hunt, because it took so much pressure off of me, because I just kind of let her do her thing. And
Jerry, I think she's. I'm sorry, I jump in there a minute. I think Jenny's the only one of your dogs that I've had the pleasure of hunting with over the years. I think when I was with PKC, and that was before your days of getting into the registry business, we hunted a couple nights, I think, with Jenny, and she was a real deal, and the bottom line kind of increased when you let her go, didn't it?
Yep, yeah, it worked out well, and she was a blessing to me and my family. I lost my job due to a downsizing, actually right after I placed her in the PKC World Championship in 2002, and I really was bouncing around trying to decide what to do for a career, and I'd got several good job offers, but they were not within driving distance of me, and with me and Brenda's mom still living, and us wanting to be close to them, that really wasn't an option for me. So I was going to start my own business, and really didn't have the funds to start it. And several people have been trying to buy Jenny, and then of course, the following year I placed her in the UKC World Hunt, and that kicked that up a notch or two with people interested. And then in early in 2004, John Strickland called me about her, and I just really didn't want to sell her. I was waiting for her to come in heat, and I was going to breed her. But he made me some offers, and eventually he made me an offer that was extremely good. He said, or I'll give you less money, and I'll give you half of whatever she wins for the next year. I said, I'll do that. And he was kind of surprised at how quick I accepted that. And I said, that's a no-brainer. And so it ended up, you know, just about every Tuesday, it seemed like. Obviously wasn't every Tuesday, but several Tuesdays I would get an envelope in the mail from John Strickland, and that helped out a lot when I was starting my own business.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great story.
Yeah,
a great story. You bet.
So, Jerry, let's. Are you wrapped up there on? Was Jenny pretty much your the last dog that you had any I don't want to say success because you've always been successful, but winning success in competition.
Yeah, the one I kind of skipped over that wasn't born here is actually the first female that there were two females that I bought through the years as kind of an outcross, or to use as outcrosses, and they were both good dogs. One of them was a female called Kiss.
I was wondering if you were
going
to talk about Kiss. She was just a young dog. Yeah, she was just a young dog, and James Tyree hunted her for me in the Pro Championship and won that. And then the following year, I got when the Super Stakes was all one Super Stakes down in Aurora, Kentucky. I got her in one cast leading up to the final, I guess the second last semifinal cast on Sunday night with her, and got beat out. And she was a really nice female. Again, she was one of those that wasn't my style necessarily, but she was good at what she did. She was a trailing type dog that would have coons when she treed, and probably her strongest point was if there was 5 coons in an acre woods, she would, if you keep recasting her, she would tree every one of them. She would go deep if she needed to, but she seemed like she could count those coons. If you were in a cast that led away before they cut loose, it would always put a smile on my face, because I knew when we cut loose, she'd go behind us and tree one. It was both good and frustrating when you were trying to pleasure hunt her, because a lot of times you would go to a place you wanted to hunt, and when you turned her loose, she'd go the other way. But that was one of them. Then the other one I bought was the Dancer female, which was the mother of Hardwood Henry, and she was another female that we won a Lee Crawford with hunt with. And I think that was in the 90s when I won that also. Well, there's no doubt that the Salt Creek
98, I think.
Yeah, those Salt Creek Walkers have made an impact. I've seen over the years you see them, different handlers that have been successful with them, and the amazing thing to me was the way that you can identify the Salt Creek dogs. They're always a good-looking hound. They always have a huge horn on them. They've got pretty good hunt. They're just exceptional hounds as a whole, and that's you've definitely got the knack there for being able to breed true to type. There's no doubt.
Well, I've enjoyed my dogs through the years, and I've always felt like I've been blessed and lucky at the same time, mainly for the reason that I've believed a couple of times in my life that I had the breeding thing figured out, only to be convinced otherwise repeatedly, and the no matter who, if somebody tells you they've got the breeding thing figured out, it kind of makes you wonder, because I've made some crosses that I was just convinced would be the best thing since sliced bread, and thoroughly disappointed. And I've made some other crosses expecting good results and had fantastic results. So it's not a complete science where you can like baking a cake, where whatever ingredients you put in, you know what you're going to get out, because it really doesn't work like that.
Jerry, this comes to mind with me, and I think I may have mentioned this a while back in a podcast. As I go through ProHound each month, which is for our listeners, that's the PKC's official magazine, with all the results and the standings and so forth. The thing that really jumps out to me is that if you go down the list and look at whether it's the male leaders, female leaders, pup leaders, the entire list is devoid of any one single dog dominating that list. There's if there's 15 dogs on that list, or 20, whatever there'll probably be 12 or 18 of those that are sired by different stud dogs. That tells me that, there's no one dog out there that's dominating the breeding activity, and that we have done a good job, apparently, especially in the world of competition, of producing dogs that can indeed produce themselves. So how does a breeder make a decision nowadays, really, as to which? And I guess we're jumping ahead here a little bit, but I know that there's been a dog that you've picked recently, a couple of dogs that you've picked recently to breed to. And as a breeder myself in years past, I'm interested in what breeders are doing. And I know two dogs that stand out that I think our leaders can identify with, that you've chosen to add to your breeding program. And Chris, if we're ready to go into this, I'd like to get Jerry's answer as to why within your own breed you chose the Cuz dog, the Neosho River Cuz dog. And then as we talked about crossbreds earlier, you chose the Big Country dog with which Chris is very familiar. Could you answer that for our listeners?
Sure. The Cuz dog was, I guess you would say, a traditional way that I try to pick a stud dog. As old and gray-haired as I am, most of the pedigrees have dogs in it that I'd hunted with, and the Cuz dog was an example of that. Several of the dogs in his pedigree I'd hunted with, and so I was familiar with those. And the fact that in the last 3 or 4 years, his reproduction across a lot of different females has been pretty awesome. And so I look for consistency across different bred females, and if possible, I definitely like to breed to something that I've got some firsthand experience with. I mean, even if I know that a stud dog's throwing winners, I kind of like to get a pretty good idea of what type of dogs they are, because as you both know, just because it's a winner doesn't mean it'd be something you'd like to hunt. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the dogs in Cuz's pedigree fit the description of the kind of dogs I like to hunt. As far as the crossbreeding, some people have asked me, with being a Walker breeder for all those years, I'm surprised you made a crossbred cross and all that. And I said, my answer to that is, it just was something that was interesting for me to see what I would get. And I thought I would try it. The reason I chose Big Country was because knowing Chris and Steve Burkholder and Donnie and Ken Cohn and their opinions of him and how high they were, I thought that would be, if I was going to try a crossbred litter, that would be a good place to go.
Well, I think those pups that came out of that cross, as a litter as a whole, people are pretty daggone happy with the results they got from that. Are you still hunting your female? I'll put you on the spot here a little bit.
Well, as much as you could say I'm hunting her, she's I haven't put a lot of time in her. She's actually just going out of heat now, but she's a dog that'll tree a coon, and she's got the looks and the mouth that I like, and she's got a lot of natural tendencies that I like. But right now she's still doing more running than I like.
Right. Right. We've talked about that.
But I'm hopeful that that's a stage. I'd wanted to get her to the point where I could hunt her by herself last season and just hunt her through the season and let her work her way out of that. And she just was not ready for that. But she's to the point now, if if the season started tonight, I could definitely take her through it and enjoy it. Interesting that I'm talking about coon season now, because most competition hunters don't care one thing about coon season. But the reason coon season works better for me nowadays, not because coons are worth anything or coon pelts are worth anything. It's just at that time of the year, my traveling finally slows down and I can actually hunt. So.
Right. Well, you've got a ton of stories to tell, Jerry, and I always liked your stories about going up and hunting with Frank Gidding and what an impact he had on your breeding program and how hard he hunted. And just give us a real quick story about going up and hunting with Frank Gidding, or what's the most memorable thing about hunting with Frank Gidding that you remember?
Well, the first time I went up to hunt with Frank, actually I went up to breed that female. Actually, I take that back. I wasn't going to breed her. I was going to leave her there with him. The An3 female just happened to be in heat at the time. I had to make a 2 or 3 week trip over to Poland when I worked for Woodmiser, and we were building a manufacturing plant over there, and I was going to have to be gone, and I'd called Frank and asked him if he would keep her there for me and breed her, and he did. So I took her up and dropped her off. But the interesting part, I think it was in about May of the year, and we were kind of having a monsoon for 2 or 3 days there, and I got up there, and it was still pouring down rain. And there was probably 8 trucks in Frank's driveway, people there to go hunting. I think it was a Friday or Saturday night. And so we all went out, and it was continued to pour down rain. And by about, I don't know, 11 o'clock, it was down to 4 or 5 trucks. And then by midnight, it was down to 3. And pretty soon it was just me and Frank, and we hunted till daylight. And I think that night we hunted at least 3 or 4 different pups out of Zacket Jr. and Junior himself. We hunted early, and I was really impressed with the young dogs out of Junior, and was really happy that I was making that choice. But it was a memorable night of hunting, and I don't remember how many coons we treed, but we had a good time, and Frank was always one of those guys that if you went hunting with him, you knew he was a real coon hunter.
I remember so well my hunts with Frank over the years, Jerry, up in Michigan, and I was fortunate enough to hunt with Zacket Jr. several times, and with several sons of his, and all the good times. And we'd typically go over to Alan and Beth Snedeker's, meet over there and hunt around that area and all. And what a great guy he is. And I don't know if we could get Frank on a podcast or not. I'm not sure that he would go for that. But wow, the stories that he could tell, for sure. And he is the consummate coon hunter. I don't think there's ever been a harder hunter than Frank. And I know you and I tried to make a breeding with the Walker female that I had out of a couple of different sons of Zacket Jr. That was your Socket dog and your Sam dog. What about them?
Well, kind of like Chris alluded to earlier, I always stayed away from male dogs. In fact, I think the Bing dog that I mentioned I bought from John Monroe, I think that was in the early 80s. That was the last male dog that I had and kept here until probably after the year 2000.
I always say that when you're hunting a female, it seems like they come in heat at the most inopportune times. And Jerry, what's always your response to that?
My response to that is that is true, and they do cause a lot of problems there. But from what I've seen over the years, the male dogs are in heat 24/7.
That's right. Yep, male dogs are in heat 365 days a year, 24/7. So, Steve, let's get back into the conversation we were having about you and Jerry trying to team up to make a cross.
Okay, well, several years ago, most people know that I've had the plot breed all these years, passed down from my dad, who was a lifelong bear hunter. I also coon hunted those dogs and was happy with the breed, but I had the opportunity right after, this was in my PKC days, and that year in the PKC national race, it was really tight, and Jerry will probably remember this. A couple of dogs named Mill Creek Molly and Silver Dollar Stone were embroiled in this really tight national race, and I believe Molly ended up winning that race by just a few dollars, if I'm correct, Jerry. But then when
that's correct.
Yeah, I think it was like $6 or some crazy small sum like that. But then I was fortunate enough to be out on the final cast at the World Hunt that fall there at Aurora, and Stone won the World Hunt. So shortly thereafter, I see a message on the PKC message board by Chris Allen, who handled Molly, and he says, we're taking her down to visit Stone. And I remember saying, a cross like that would make me see spots. And, well, I spoke too soon because Chris contacted me and said, hey, would you be interested in one of these pups? And I said, well, I might be. And he told me the price, and I gasped and grabbed my wallet and held on tight. But anyway, long story short, I did get a puppy out of that cross, and she turned out to be a real nice little female that I enjoyed hunting for many years. And so Jerry and I got together and started talking about breeding. So maybe you can take it from there, Jerry.
Yeah, I think we tried the Salt Creek Sam dog, which he was out of Sackett Jr. and my Ann 3 female. And at that time, I also had another stud dog I was breeding some, and that was the dog I called Socket, and he was out of Sackett Jr. and Molly Ann. So he would have been a half-brother to the Jenny female. But, I really never did like to hunt a male dog, but I was kind of getting to the point that I was not happy with the last few crosses I'd made. And so I went in search of some male pups that I'd sold at weaning age, and I bought the Socket dog back from a gentleman in Texas, and I bought the Sam dog back from a guy in Kentucky, and I was extremely fortunate with both. Neither one of them produced a lot of pups in their life. In fact, I think they were both over 7 years old when I got them back, and hadn't sired any pups. But I think they both have sired less than 250 pups, and their pup earnings and wins at UKC have done pretty well for a small number of pups.
Well, the rest of that story on that female that I called Kelly was that she never did conceive. We tried to breed her later on, and had her to reproductive specialists and the whole bit, but it just wasn't meant to be for her to have a litter. But man, that I was really excited about that back in the day, her being out of Stone and him being a second junior bred dog down the line himself, and all. But all good stuff back in the day, huh, Jerry?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your job. And Chris can jump in here anytime he wants, but I think you and we had Alan Gingrich with UKC on not long ago, and we talked about, he and I had occupied the same chair up there in Kalamazoo, and And now we're here with you, Jerry, and you and I have kind of taken similar paths in our careers, and I'll just kind of tee this up a little bit, but I want you to talk about PKC and your involvement with them, and just explore all the avenues we have time to do about that. But I know back when I was with PKC and I began to be courted, I guess for a better word, the old timers will know what that word means, by the AKC to come and try to build a coonhound program. And I finally succumbed to that and moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. And I knew I needed help. And Jerry, you were one of the first people on my mind. And without going through all the details and all, you and I worked together along with Lindell Price and Jimmy Phillips and later with David McKee to build that coonhound program. And man, we hit the ground running and we did a great job there for a while. If we could have just got the coon hunters to register their dogs, I think there would have been a bigger success story. But I really enjoyed working with you and found you to be particularly helpful in a couple of ways. Number one, you're an organizer. You're a detail guy. You know how to get things done and do them properly, but you also have a great knowledge of the rules. And I think if you can remember back when we sat down at my dining room table there in Raleigh and with the guys and numerous phone conversations, put together a brand new set of rules for the AKC. And that was all fun stuff. And I know you're a rules guy, and I want to talk to you about rules and your philosophies and so forth. But let's tell the listeners how long you've been with PKC and a little bit about that journey up to this point.
Okay. Well, during your time with PKC, at that time I was the president of the Walker Association for PKC, and I was also on the executive board. So I was heavily involved in rule and policy stuff, even as a non-employee. And then in November of 2004, I remember when you were preparing to move to Raleigh, and we talked a few times, and it was kind of interesting. You were chomping at the bit to get the program going, and I was excited about helping you with it. And you said, well, I can't really hire you officially till the first of the year in 2005, but if you don't mind, start working now. So so I actually started helping you probably, I think it was probably in November 2000.
That's right.
And
I knew I knew I had the right guy when you agreed to do that, Jerry.
But I really enjoyed the time with AKC and because it was something new, not only in the AKC Coonhound program, because it was kind of starting fresh. Even though they'd had a Coonhound program, we were doing everything as a new, kind of throwing out the old and starting from scratch, and that was exciting from a Coonhound registry standpoint. But from a personal standpoint, I'd spent 24 years in the manufacturing industry and trying to learn everything there was to learn about that. And then here I am in a Coonhound registry thing that I've never been involved in that business. So that was completely new for me. So it was exciting in several different ways, and definitely enjoyed working with Steve and Lindell and Jimmy. When we would go to the bigger hunts, we always had a good time and always had good discussions, and everything was always positive.
Yeah, well, for sure. We did have good times. And, it's amazing when you can, you try to build a program and or my philosophy was always, to try to build the best team that I could, people that I never claimed to know everything. And I learned so much from you, Jerry and from Lindell, my longtime friend. Lindell and I go back probably 40 years at least, and Jimmy back to my days with the Winter Classic in Albany, Georgia, and also that was a fun time for me too, because we really you guys put up with me pretty well. And I often thought after we'd have a meeting or whatever, I'd say, I don't know why those guys put up with me, but I sure am glad they do. But those were good times. Well, let's talk about you going to PKC. I know that you got an offer to go with them, and you and I discussed that, and I sure hated to lose you. But just talk about your involvement now with PKC.
Well, I started with PKC in September of 2010, so I'm coming up on my 9th year anniversary here before too long. And the one thing that, people probably have the wrong impression of this type of a job at a registry. I think, from the outside looking in, it probably looks like, you go to a big hunt and you take entries, and when they're all done, you take pictures, and that's about all there is to do. But I'm sure differently, and you've got at least an 8 or 9 hour day job, and then with PKC at least, you've got to have your phone on all night, and some nights you might get 5 or 6 phone calls, and some nights you won't get any. But it's a little bit different than it kind of looks like from the outside. And the other thing that would probably be surprising to most people is how much of a clerical type job it is. In other words, it's just managing a lot of details on the computer and working out details with people on the phone for upcoming events and this and that and whatever. And it's just a lot of office work. But as you alluded to, probably the thing that I enjoy the most is working with the Coonhound rules and trying to teach and mentor people into learning the rules. And what I try to do as much as I can, when I can, is when somebody asks me about rules or is having trouble understanding something, I try to make sure that I forward them the exact wording of the rule, because it's so easy through the years, and it's happened to me before early in my hunting career, when I would ask another hunter about a rule, you don't always get the right answer. And it's easy to say what the rule is or what you think it should be, but a lot of times it's a whole different thing when you actually read the rule. And here's what it says. And my philosophy has always been, a lot of people, you'll read the rule to them or explain the rule to them, and they say, well, I don't think that's how it should be. And my philosophy has always been, I have no problem improving it or changing it, through the process. But until we do, we've got to use what we've got. And if it's flawed, we'll just change it when the time comes to change it. And,
Jerry, if I can interrupt you there, a humorous story comes to mind. I was at Southeastern Walker Days one year there in the barn at Salisbury, and David Garden was making an announcement to the crowd, and there were probably 300 hunters there getting ready to go to the woods and all the buzz that was going on. And he said, now listen up, guys. He said, I know, and this hunt was in February. He said, I know you guys have spent all winter long thinking up changes for these rules and thinking how they ought to be improved and how they could be better. But I'm going to tell you right now, don't use those changes tonight. Use the rules that are on this scorecard. And I thought that was pretty cool, because we all have our own interpretations and philosophies and all. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I couldn't resist.
No, that's all good stuff. And it just so happens we're in the we at PKC are in the process of a rule change year now. I think when you were with PKC, it was done every 2 years, and now it's done every 4 years. And so we just elected new national directors, and we're going through the rule change process right now.
Well, explain that process a little bit about how the rules committee is formed, or who makes the changes at PKC.
Okay. Well, PKC is a membership-based organization, and what that means is PKC manages the organization of PKC. It manages all the events and the registration and whatnot. But all the membership makes up the PKC National Association, and each breed and each state has a representative elected from the membership, and that's called the breeder state president, and those are called the PKC National Directors. And there's an election every 4 years, and following that election, which brings on new national directors, and some are reelected to another term, and that gives them an opportunity to recommend rule changes. And once the rule changes are all received and organized and down on paper, then it's sent back to the national directors, and they pour through those proposed changes and talk to their constituencies within their breed or state, and then they vote on each one of those proposals. And some years, those ones that make it out of the national director scrutiny are sent to a committee, and they study it further, and then it's brought to a vote of the full body. And this year is probably going to be a little bit different in that the rule proposals that are preliminarily approved by the national directors will be voted on the full body of national directors. And those rule changes that pass, will be implemented at the beginning of the new year, which our new year starts October 1st. So that's the kind of the process from beginning to end.
I see. So if I've got a rule change burning in my soul, my recourse is to go to my state representative or my breed representative and have him present that to the directors. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Well, Jerry.
Well, what about? Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was just gonna say, over your tenure there at PKC, you've developed a kind of a standard issue, or maybe a slogan for people who want to be successful in PKC, and that's read your blue book and hunt your hound. How many did you coin that, or did somebody else come up with that, Jerry?
I think that was me, based on experience, and I also added something else to the end of that, and read your good book.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But which I found also helpful.
Right.
But the there's no, and any experienced houndsman will tell you there's no substitute for knowing those rules, because it first off, when you're training your hound, if you don't know the rules of the game, it's hard to train your hound to fit those rules. And so the better houndsmen, or the better trainers for competition hunting, are the guys that know those rules and know what's going to get you minus and knows what's going to get you plus, and they train that hound to fit that. And then also, when you're out there actually competing, if you don't know the rules, you get taken advantage of pretty easily. And just knowing the rules and quickly other people will acknowledge that you know the rules, and it just keeps everything on the right path.
Yeah.
Well, for sure, there's a procedure, Jerry. You know, there's been so many times in my experience, over 3 registries and now 2 for you, that people come to us with problems, and we really are sympathetic to what they're saying, but they haven't followed the procedure. And to me, that's the most frustrating thing, to know that a fella maybe has a legitimate complaint or a legitimate issue there, but he didn't take the time. And I think that gets back to what you say about to learn the blue book, which is the rules as provided by PKC. Now that comes to the member, doesn't it, Jerry? And how often does he get the blue book?
Well, the new blue books are mailed out after the 4-year rule changes are implemented. Okay. and printed in the blue book. But aside from that, any member at any time can call the office and have a blue book sent to them. And obviously you can read them online. You can save the blue book to your iPhone. I mean, there's in our current stage of technology, there's, you can have a blue book in your hand out there in the woods.
That's exactly right. So, and with smartphone technology and everything now, I always carried the blue book right there on my iPhone and linked it up, and it was handy to have, especially when there's a question on the cast, when you can pull the rules out and actually arguing, maybe not arguing your point, but arguing your case with the rules right in your hand. That's pretty handy. So, Jerry, I've got if we're done with PKC stuff, I think we've hit that pretty hard. Obviously, competition coon hunting has been very big in your life and had a big impact on your life. But I want to get your opinion on something, because this is a question that came up in a podcast some time back. But what is your opinion of why walkers are so successful in the competition coon hunting game?
I think, in my opinion, it's just because of the speed. We've talked several times in this podcast about my nature of being wanting things done quickly and being impatient about things, and I think people by nature are impatient. And back in the 70s and 80s, when people were trying to breed these dogs and having issues with dogs being 2 or 3 years old before they matured and was ready for competing, I think the walkers, for whatever reason, and it's probably because they had a lot of tree dog bred into the running walkers, probably bridged that gap sooner than the other breeds. In other words, they'd have dogs treeing, in those early days, well, in certain strains, well before they were 8 or 9 months old, and of course in current day it's 6 months old, and the people that were trying to hunt the other breeds weren't experiencing that quick of a response after they made a cross, and I think it's just out of necessity that people said, hey, I'm not going to wait around 2 years when I can wait 1 year.
Right.
And so I think that was the original reason. And then the other reason, I think it's mainly due to speed.
I've seen,
again, there's exceptional individuals in every breed.
I've seen that speed firsthand. Sometimes they're so fast they beat the coon to the tree.
Absolutely. And I think the Walker Hounds went through a bad stage, probably a 5 or 6 year maybe stage, where maybe 10 years ago, when they were producing a lot of slick treeing type dogs. And I think that's come back around because people realized pretty quickly, or maybe not pretty quickly, maybe eventually they realized that if you're going to win coon hunts, you've got to have eyes in them trees.
Right.
And I think the accuracy of the Walker Hounds today is a lot different than it was 12 years ago.
So you say they've got to have eyes in those trees. So during that time period, is that when guys came up with the idea of slingshots and cat's eyes and stuff like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I should have said coon eyes, or raccoon eyes, but yeah, there's some, I'm sure there's some hunters around the country, older hunters, that have a slingshot and some nails with a wire on hanging up somewhere as a memorial to all that.
Sounds like you're familiar.
I hope that doesn't.
Let's move on.
I hope that doesn't go on anymore.
Hey, Jerry, in case you don't recognize it, and our listeners either, Chris is kind of he's trying to evolve into a big game hunter.
I'm a sniper.
You know? And he's leaving the coonhound guys like you and me kind of in the dust here, and he's taking every opportunity to disparage us if he can. You know, I just wanted to give you a tip here of what's going on with Chris. You know,
I'm a wannabe on every level. I'm a failed competition hunter, and I'm a wannabe big game hunter. So I'm caught somewhere in the middle here.
Yeah, well, you know.
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
Go ahead.
Well,
I was just going to say to kind of encourage Chris a little bit. I've always felt that the dogs that couldn't make it as a coonhound, a lot of them do make good big game hounds.
That's
because they can go out there and chase an animal, and they can watch it climb a tree, and they can sit there and look at it. And they don't have to be, they don't have to be a really good tree dog. They can just. So, if I make any more of those crosses that won't tree, I'll kind of send them on down to Chris.
There you go.
there
Absolutely.
You go.
I guess that segues into my next question and topic. We got to be winding down here pretty soon, but I wanted to cover this part. It seems like the question is often asked or maybe discussed, kicked around, whatever you want to call it. What is the impact that competition coon hunting has had on, in your opinion, Jerry? What impact has it had on our hound sports as a whole? A lot of times we see guys that want to pigeonhole pleasure hunter versus competition hunter, pleasure dog versus competition dog. In your opinion, what role has competition coon hunting played in our overall sport, big picture, worldwide hound sports?
Well, in my opinion, from the big picture, most of the people that grew up in the era that I did, when hide prices were high, and they just coon hunted. For example, when I started coon hunting, it wouldn't be uncommon if outside of coon season, I may be hunting my dog 2 or 3 times in that whole year. And the whole focus was on game catching. And that's what I looked for in my dogs from the beginning to the last cross I made. And so everything that I've done has come from the philosophy that I want to tree as many coons as I can in the shortest amount of time. That, if I'm out there coon hunting, I want to tree as many coons as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my philosophy on a dog. And it just so happens that also fits the competition coonhound side of things. You want to tree as many coons as you can in the shortest amount of time. Now the people that have grown up in the eras since then, that people don't hardly pleasure hunt anymore and don't hardly hunt for fur anymore, that the only focus that they've ever known is competition. I think it's both of those things have influenced the breedings of hounds a lot. And probably the two most significant things that's changed in hounds over the years is dogs that leave you barking, babbling dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Those not only would have no purpose in pleasure hunting or hide hunting, the problem would be resolved quickly because it would get on your nerves. It definitely wouldn't have any advantage or purpose in big game hunting. You may not care one way or the other if they leave barking, but it sure doesn't help anything.
Right.
But in a night hunt, it's a competitive advantage. And in the 80s, when I first started competition hunting, all four dogs treed together 95% of the time. So you had to have a quick tree dog if you were going to compete. And so a lot of the breeding was going towards that one bark quick tree dog. But once the independent dogs came on the scene, that became a lot less of a necessity. So, people started breeding more independents, and that way it doesn't matter if your dog takes 3 minutes to set up a tree. If he's quarter mile the other direction, you're in no hurry. So aside from the fact that a lot of the independent dogs are man-made, it's also something that changed the breeding. So, but along and short of it, if you said, since I started hunting until today, what's changed the most in the hounds due to competition hunting? I would say it's taken the trailing dogs almost completely out of the picture. A lot of the other things have kind of gone up and down, but the number one thing has been a change in the trailing characteristics and capabilities.
Well, I agree with that assessment there, Jerry, and I often dissect what we're doing with our competition hounds, and I relate it to my son showed pigs or swine in 4-H for several years, and a show pig is definitely different than the pig that you're going to raise behind the barn for bacon. But the thing that you've got to keep in mind is that is a prototype for a certain situation there for that show ring, but it's also taken back to production hogs. All those 4-H judges are supposed to judge that show based on what's good for agriculture in the future. So they've bred for hogs that will put on more weight faster. If the market's calling for a leaner hog, then they breed more muscle in. If they're looking for more body or cover, then they'll breed for more cover on the pigs. So, relating that back to our coonhounds, the same has happened over the years with our competition hounds. And from what I've heard you say about, there was a time period there where some of the tracking abilities of the dogs was lacking. It seems like we're going through this thing meticulously, step by step, and eventually it's going to come around full circle where nobody is abandoning the complete hound. They're just trying to figure out the recipe to get there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it is going to come full circle some, because we've gotten to the point, if you go to a higher level competition hunt where you're paying big entry fees, it's a really big job for a judge and a guide from just a sheer walking standpoint, and probably less of a challenge for the judge in a judging standpoint, because when they cut those dogs loose, they scatter like a covey of quail, and you spend your time walking a mile here, then a mile there, then a mile there, and so forth until the cast is over.
Right.
And again, some of those dogs were bred to be independent like that, and some of them were trained to be independent like that.
Right.
And my personal opinion is is that before too long, somebody's going to have the idea that, hey, if I've got a dog that'll hunt with me or make 300-yard circles, I can score several coons while we in between walking to these dogs that is within my hearing. And what that's going to require, if your dog's going to do that, he's going to have a lot of nose to either tree layups around you, because there's not always going to be hot coons available, or to trail up coons. So in my opinion, that has a large potential of coming full circle when people start winning with that type of dog again.
Well, I agree, Jerry, with what you're saying. And from my standpoint of being in that gray generation, I know that, it's not physically possible in some cases for a guy to hunt that kind of dog. He might make that one mile trip in there and back to his own dog, but to have to do that 3 or 4 times in the course of a 2-hour cast, it's just not going to work. And so he's going to stay home, and I've talked to breeders that have said, I don't know exactly if I want to try to go down this path to breed the type of dog that's winning in some of these bigger events today, because, I'm going to have to change up my breeding program, because I do have that kind of dog that'll hunt that woods out, that will tree all those coons like you spoke about. I think it was which one of your females you said would tree all the coons in the woods. That would be
the
Kiss. Right. Well, that would be, I think, and there may be a natural progression to that, and out of necessity for guys like me, because, when I picked a pup to train out, I tried to get it from a bloodline that I thought would hunt a good hunting dog, but not an inline through the country crazy type dog. And then, of course, I find out that many of these dogs, as you say, are made to be that way. And you certainly are not breeding for that type of dog. So that presents a whole new set of problems to the breeder that's looking to produce those kind of dogs naturally. But I agree with you. I think things will in time come full circle.
Well, I'll tell you what, this has been an awesome conversation. When you get 3 guys that know each other so well, we can sit around and ramble on and ramble on. A lot of good information here was passed around. But we're over 2 hours on this thing, Steve. So I think we probably ought to wrap this up. And I know Jerry's time's precious, but I'm sure we can rope him into coming back on here and talking again soon.
Yeah, what I'd like for Jerry to do just real briefly is to give us a rundown of what big events are coming up over the next coming couple of months, 2 or 3 months, Jerry. I know it's the busy time of year coming up.
Yeah, just so happens I'm getting ready to go back to one of your home states. I'll be leaving Thursday morning to go to the Michigan Madness at a new location this year in Hillsdale. And so that's actually, that Michigan Madness is going on now. The first 3 nights are at Reading. And so...
Of course, by the time our listeners get this, that's going to be in the history books, Jerry, because of the time lag. But yeah, that Michigan Madness has turned into a great hunt for PKC. I wish that had been going on back in the day when I was up there. That's an awesome hunt.
Yeah, and then Labor Day weekend, I'll be at Greensburg for 6 nights for the Labor Day Classic. That's always a good time, and I get to sleep in my own bed, so that's even better. And then the last week of September is the Fall Super Stakes, and that's for Monday through Saturday is for 1, 2, and 3-year-olds, and then Saturday we have the Baby Stakes for the less than 1-year-olds, and then we move on into the next big thing is will be 3 nights of competition at the Youth World Championship at the end of October, and that's always fun. We hunt about 100 youth, and the entry fee is free, and it's just a big time, and we try to celebrate the youth and encourage them and bring them into the fold. And Steve, you were nice enough to come by and talk to them a couple years ago, and we really enjoyed that. And I hope you did as well.
Oh, it was awesome, Jerry. I've always been proud of the PKC youth program, and man, you guys are doing a great job with that. And it was a real honor for me to be able to come and to speak to the kids, for sure. Appreciate the invitation.
Well, Jerry, have you got?
And then
go ahead, finish up.
I was just going to say the week following then is the PKC World Championship, and that takes us into the end of October, and then I get a couple months off of traveling. So go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm glad you threw in the World Championship. That's a pretty notable event that we shouldn't have skipped there. So I'm glad I shut up and let you finish. Steve, you've got some concluding thoughts on our conversation today?
Well, it's been great for me. Jerry is busy, and I try not to bug him too much, but he's been a great source of phone numbers and information for me as I pursue my writing activities and all. But just like we say about everything in this sport, the friendships are the greatest assets. And just great to have a friend like Jerry, and have you on today, Jerry. It's really been great to spend the time with you, and just wish you the very best, that you continue to lead. You and Roger Dale and all the staff at PKC are doing a great job. And I remember just real fondly back in the day when I first started hunting in PKC, and my wife was never, excited in any way about my hunting. She tolerated it, but when I started bringing money home, that changed the picture. In fact, I'd come home from a hunt, and there'd be a note on the downstairs bathroom mirror. How much money did you win? So it kind of changed the picture there. So you guys are doing a good job, Jerry, and I hope to maybe, I don't know, I every year I say I'm going to get out to the World Hunt again just to visit, and I don't know about this year, but it would be great if I could. But thanks for coming on. It's been a great visit with you.
Jerry, you got any concluding thoughts?
I've enjoyed it.
Good. Yeah.
I just wanted to say I think you guys are doing a great job with these podcasts, getting information out to all the coon hunters in an easy way that they can listen to on their way to work and back, or on the way to hunting back. And I appreciate you including me.
Hey, it's our pleasure, and I'll just wrap up with this before I hand it back over to Steve. The most important thing that we do in this sport is build relationships. And Jerry, I just want to tell you publicly, I've always appreciated your friendship, the work we've done together on different issues, and with the Hoosier Tree Dog Alliance. I mean, your objective thinking and your willingness to jump in and get things done. There were times when the Hoosier Tree Dog Alliance felt like another job for us, and we spent a lot of time working on that. But the main thing here, the thing I'll always remember Jerry Moll for is not for the Salt Creek Coonhounds, but for the man that you are, and your work ethic and your friendship. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Chris. I feel the same about you guys.
Good. Yep. Well, Steve, you've always got the final word. Wrap us up.
Well, Chris, this has been a fun hour, 2 hours, whatever. We've had a great time today. Jerry, there's a bear hunter. I say old, he's really not as old as I am, over in West Virginia, that passed the saying along to my dad and me, and it stuck with me, and we always use it to close out our podcast. There's a track here to be run, boys, and I'll tell you what, You follow your hound, and I'll follow mine.